Welcome to Diva on a Mission podcast, where we share snippets of joy to uplift, inspire, and motivate you. I'm your host, Eva the Diva, and I'm thrilled to bring you stories that transform everyday moments into profound experiences. In this podcast episode, I want to share with you the story of Wangu Makeri. She was the first female leader in colonial Kenya. The reason she is top of mind is at the end of August, I was afforded a very precious opportunity to attend the Wangu Makeri play at the Kenya National Theatre. I had missed it the first time around, and this was a rerun. So the first run of the play was very successful, and there was enough customer demand for them to get a second run, and I attended this second run, and it was a well-told, well-visualized, performed version of her story. And for those of you who are not familiar, I will give you a brief history of Wangu Makeri. Of course, the play gets into the cultural and nuances of the time of Wangu and when she lived and how things were. There was a lot of humor, a lot of cultural knowledge shared. There was also a lot of visual information to be gleaned from their costumes, the music that was presented, because it wasn't fully there was some music, and now the storytelling part. And then, of course, they use all the elements of storytelling, humor, music, narrating, all of that. And it was very, very well done. So, before I start rambling about the play, let me give you a brief history of Wangu Makeri. Wangu Makeri was born around 1856 in Getie village, Kangema division, Murang'a. She was the daughter of Gatweka Masharia and Wakero of Ndorobo, descended from the Thaga clan. There, she met her husband, Makeri Wambogo, with whom they raised 6 children in Koibe village in Murang'a. She entered into a relationship with the paramount chief of Fort Hall, which is present-day Murang'a, Karuri Wagakure, who had 60 wives and stayed with her family whenever he stopped by their village. When her husband learned about the relationship, he was offered the position of headman by Karuri in an attempt to appease him, but he declined. The position was then offered to Wangu, who accepted it in 1902. This position of headman was reserved for men, and Wangu became the first and only female leader of the Kikuyu during the British colonial period. The previous year, 1901, the railway construction had reached Kisumu, and the British withdrew East Africa's boundaries. The British began a taxation system for its new subjects to fund these initiatives. Paramount chiefs like Karuri were appointed to help collect the money, and headmen such as Wangu assisted them by acting as the grassroots agents in the administrative structure. Wangu's tasks as headman involved collecting taxes, brokering peace in the community, and communicating the colonial rules to the people. She was considered harsh and authoritarian in how she intimidated tax evaders and subjected them to solitary confinement. Wangu always sat on the back of her offenders while they knelt before her in submission, suffering ridicule and humiliation from their neighbors. Her downfall came when she joined men in a dance called kefata, naked, which was reserved for men, and not even moving near male dancers was allowed. It is alleged that when Wangu saw Karori Wagakuri dancing, she stood up, flung herself on the dance floor, and began to dance vigorously, exposing her breasts and thighs. Her dishonorable dance soon became a subject of discussion among the people she ruled, and in June 1909, Wangu was forced to resign. Even though many view her as a ruthless leader, Wangu is celebrated for fighting and earning respect in a male-dominated society and proving that women can be leaders. Wangu wa Makeri was the only female Kikuyu chief during the colonial period. She was a bold, pragmatic, and controversial leader who challenged gender norms and navigated a patriarchal system to gain power. If she were alive and faced with Kenya's most pressing issues today, corruption, unemployment, gender inequality, environmental degradation, tribal politics, and youth disillusionment, she would likely take a strong, unconventional, and fiercely independent approach. So, from what I learned about Wangu in the play, I wanted to try and apply her leadership philosophy to our current issues. So, this is how she would respond to the following issues. Say, corruption and governance. Wangu was known for her iron-fisted leadership. She would likely push for zero tolerance on corruption, using strict enforcement and personal authority to restore accountability. Her modern equivalent action would be public shaming and removal of corrupt officials, centralizing systems for revenue and resource tracking, that's digitized governance, and then personal inspection tours. She was a micromanager and would want to see results. On the issue of women's leadership and gender equality, Wangu would she would break barriers in a time when women did not lead. So today she'd amplify women's voices in politics, business, and land ownerships, perhaps even forming a women-led governance model. The modern equivalent action would be to launch a movement to increase female representation in parliament and county leadership, push for equal inheritance laws and property rights for women, establish economic cooperatives for women farmers and traders. When it comes to youth unemployment and disillusionment, what would Wangu do? Wangu was entrepreneurial and strategic. She would perhaps create labor opportunities tied to cultural pride and innovation. Her modern equivalent action would be to advocate for community-based industries like textiles, agribusiness, ecotourism, or perhaps organize cultural entrepreneurships where youth monetize music, dance, and art tied to our heritage. She would perhaps also introduce mandatory skill training programs for all youth before higher education or to help them get jobs. What about on the issue of environmental degradation and land issues? What would Wangu do? As a land-conscious leader in an agrarian society, Wangu would champion land restoration and food security. Her modern equivalent action would be to lead tree planting campaigns as part of a cultural rite, enforce strict penalties for illegal logging and land grabbing, promote indigenous farming practices and regenerative agriculture. What about the issue of tribalism and political division? Wangu was strategic in alliances. Today, she'd leverage intertribal marriages, cultural festivals, and economic incentives to unite people. She would use cultural diplomacy to bridge tribes through, same example, music, art, intercounty trade fairs. She would also perhaps push for meritocracy-based system rather than an ethnicity-driven appointment. Education and cultural identity. Wangu valued authority and tradition, but embraced modernism where beneficial. She championed education that preserves culture while equipping us for the future. She would revamp school curriculum to include African history, entrepreneurship, and technology, build community libraries and cultural centers, fund scholarships for girls in STEM fields. Wangu Makeri would be unapologetically bold, authoritarian yet pragmatic, fiercely pro-women, and deeply rooted in cultural identity while embracing progress. She'd likely be polarizing, loved for her courage and hated for her hard stance, but a very effective leader. Remember, you are a full universe. Be brave in pursuing goals, just like Wangu was. If you have, a perspective on Wangu Makeri that you would love to share, I would love to hear about it. So please share it either in the comments, in our Spotify, or on YouTube, or send us an email at doampodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep dancing, keep dreaming, keep divinely designing your life. Peace.